welcome you to what appears to be the beginning of the end of the longest government shutdown in U.S. history.
Now, because of the Republican refusal to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits, tens of millions of Americans are about to experience dramatically increased health care costs.
This is Today as It Happened. Good Monday evening to you. I'm Holly Furfer here with your chronological look at the biggest events and stories of the day, from new progress toward ending the federal government shutdown to the ongoing chaos for air travelers across the country. But first this morning, we took a look at President Donald Trump's pardons of dozens of political allies accused of trying to overturn the 2020 election. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller live in New York with the latest on this. And Alex, this was a long list of names. Who exactly did the president single out?
Holly, it was 4 pages. People that were very close to President Trump in the wake of President Biden's win in 2020, particularly some of these close confidants in the White House who led his team, the legal team, to look at the results of the 2020 election. I want to show you a couple of these main people, names who might be familiar from that time period. We're talking about Rudy Giuliani, Mark Meadows, Sidney Powell, John Eastman, and Jeffrey Clark. They were part of this team that was looking into the results of the 2020 elections. They had been indicted in other states here. Giuliani, Powell, Eastman, and Clark were also named as those alleged co-conspirators when President Trump was charged on the federal level here. Essentially, these people, as well as the others listed, including some of those fake electors who presented those certificates across states like Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, they are all given this pardon here just on the federal level here. Again, this is a preemptive pardon. Nobody on this list has been charged on the federal level. I want to read you just the top part of this. It says, "This proclamation ends a grave national injustice perpetrated upon the American people following the 2020 presidential election and continues the process of national reconciliation." Again, none of these people, Holly, have been charged on the federal level.
All right, so then how does this impact other charges many of these other people are facing across the country?
You know, it doesn't, because this only applies to the federal level. It doesn't have any impact. Many of these people have been charged on the state level as well. So in theory, those prosecutions could continue, though I will say, since President Trump's election in 2024, most of these cases have either stalled, moved at a snail's pace, or just outright been thrown out. So again, this has nothing to do with that, but it is just worth noting that many of these cases that were happening on the state level really have not gone anywhere. Now, with that being said, of course, Rudy Giuliani had that $148 million lawsuit from those 2 election workers in Georgia. That still stands. He still is supposed to pay that amount of money. So again, federal, state, very different here.
We're half a decade past this event. Why now? What's going on?
You know, despite the fact that, again, this pardon really has no real-life implications here, this is still part of President Trump's effort to really change the narrative on this. This is very clearly something that still bothers him half a decade later, that, he still has not really admitted that he lost the election in 2020. This is part of that effort to kind of rewrite the narrative about what happened during that election. We saw the pardons of the people who invaded the Capitol on January 6th. Part of the insurrection there. So all of this, again, part of that major narrative for him to kind of change the thinking about what happened in 2020.
Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller live for us in New York. Thanks for that update, Alex. And now let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day. The Supreme Court has rejected a call to overturn its landmark decision that legalized same-sex marriage nationwide. The justices turned away from an appeal from Kim Davis. She's the former Kentucky court clerk who refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples after the 2015 ruling. Davis had been trying to get the court to overturn a lower court order for her to pay $360,000 in damages to a couple she denied a license. President Donald Trump's administration returned to the Supreme Court on Monday to keep full payments in the SNAP food aid program frozen. The request is the latest legal activity over how the program that helps 42 million Americans buy groceries should proceed during the government shutdown. Lower courts have ruled the government must keep full payments flowing. The High Court is expected to decide on the latest request Tuesday. The pain Americans are facing at the airports is expected to get worse this week if Congress cannot reopen the federal government. U.S. Airlines canceled more than 1,500 flights Saturday, nearly 2,900 Sunday, as air traffic controllers who have not been paid for nearly a month stopped showing up for work. The FAA implemented a 4% flight reduction this week that will increase to 10% by this weekend. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy says cuts of up to 20% might be needed. Scripps News reporter Patrick Terpstra reports from Washington about this whole issue. And Patrick, we're learning about new restrictions going into effect today. What's the latest you can tell us?
Well, hi there, Holly. The federal government shutdown now impacting private jets. In fact, 12 cities now will have essentially no private flights allowed to take off or land. These are 12 of the biggest airports all over the country, so affecting the rich and powerful that do not rely, of course, on commercial air travel. Right now, those restrictions are set to stay in effect today until 7 p.m., but in talking with the association over those private jet flights, they're saying that this is essentially banning these airplanes for the time being from these airports, and of course saying that those restrictions could increase at any time. Exceptions to this will be made for emergency aircraft as well as law enforcement, helicopters, and other types of airplanes, but really a major development here for these private jet owners and those who take these planes not being allowed to fly in those 12 airports. As for those commercial flights, it was a day of a lot of pain yesterday, Sunday. 3,000 flights canceled at 40 airports all across the country. Again, as you mentioned, part of this plan to try to throttle down how much aviation is allowed in the skies. Today, a restriction of 4% for flights that are being canceled, but that ramps up over the days ahead to 10%. Over the weekend, some airports hit harder than others. Atlanta Hartsfield Jackson Airport, the busiest in the country yesterday, had 223 flights taken off of its rolls, and anyone that knows Atlanta knows that that is Delta's hub. Delta having to cut many flights across the board over the weekend. That pain likely to continue as the week goes on. All of this because, again, you have so many air traffic controllers in the system, thousands of them, and they have been working without a full paycheck now for weeks. As this government shutdown drags on, many of them have chosen to retire or to take second jobs to try to support their families. We heard from the National Air Traffic Control Association just today talking about the very real struggles for these air traffic controllers in this high-stakes job. He is not mincing words, saying that the safety of the flying public is now in jeopardy.
Every moment that we are at work, it requires everything we have. Focus, judgment, decisiveness, perfect decision-making, thousands of times a shift. And what hangs in the balance is our responsibility to safety in order to prevent tragedy.
And as our Capitol Hill team has been reporting, of course, there are signs that this government shutdown could be coming to an end within a matter of days. But an important thing to know when we talk about aviation, it could take weeks or even longer for the system to get back and running into what is considered normal. Airlines saying that they would not simply bring back canceled flights right away. They would perhaps add flights as time goes on. And then when it comes to air traffic control, this was a system already under strain with outdated technology. And Holly, 3,000 air traffic controllers necessary to be hired in the years ahead to really fill out staffing. So this was a system already under strain.
No kidding. Okay. And at that press conference today, we also heard Nick Daniels there say that it would take about 2 to 2.5 months for them to get back to normal, all things, running smoothly again. So for those with upcoming flights, people who are planning on traveling, especially as we head into a busy holiday season, what are the airlines telling them to do?
Well, the airlines have been consistent in saying that most flights will not be impacted. So that is some good news. But again, we're talking about 40 airports that have to have these restrictions. So they're saying that if one of your flights gets canceled, the airlines will reach out to you and let you know. So you can monitor it, but know that they will contact you if you have any changes to your flights. And the government is saying if you don't want to deal with any of this, and you'd rather drive somewhere, take a train now, those airlines will refund your ticket. But the good news is right now air travel is significantly reduced compared to peak times. Thanksgiving, though, that is another story and now just 2 weeks away. So we'll have to see how all of this continues to play out. How does this aviation system get back up to full speed with those holidays approaching, if it's true that that government shutdown is coming to an end, Holly?
All right, Scripps News investigative correspondent Patrick Terpstra live for us. Thanks for that update, Patrick. Coming up on Today As It Happened, President Donald Trump met with Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa at the White House on Monday. Stay with us for Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bowles reporting on the historic meeting straight ahead. Welcome back to Today As It Happened. Let's check back in on our daily briefing of today's top stories. The FDA will remove a long-standing warning label from hormone-based menopause drugs. The agency says it will drop the boxed warning from more than 20 pills, patches, and creams containing estrogen and progestin used to treat hot flashes and other menopause symptoms. The warning had advised doctors that hormone therapy can increase the risk of blood clots, heart problems, and other health issues. Some doctors supported the change, saying the label was outdated, but other experts opposed removing it without a more transparent process. The Supreme Court has agreed to decide whether states can continue to count late arriving mail ballots. The justices took up an appeal from Mississippi after a federal appeals court ruled the state law allowing ballots that arrive shortly after Election Day violated federal law. Mississippi is among 18 states that accept mailed ballots received after Election Day as long as they're postmarked on or before that date.
President Trump is hosting Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa at the White House today. It comes as the administration has built relations with the new Syrian leader. Trump has previously pushed for the Syrian leader to normalize relations with Israel and help fight ISIS. It's the first time a Syrian head of state has visited the White House since the country gained independence in 1946. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bowles is live with us now. She is at the White House with the latest. And Haley, what are some of the top items on the agenda between these two leaders? We did not see them publicly, at least not in the same way that we have seen other heads of state when they have come met Trump at the White House. And what does that tell us too?
Yeah, Andrew, certainly no public images coming out of the White House today of the meeting between al-Sharaa and President Trump, something that we typically see when foreign leaders are here. The Syrian leader leaving the grounds just a short time ago, stopping outside of White House gates, appearing to greet apparent supporters of him who had gathered. We have not seen a readout from the White House yet on any potential outcomes of this meeting. But nonetheless, it does mark the strongest embrace of the new Syrian leader to date, a once insurgent leader who has now met with the U.S. president at the White House. Leading into this meeting, we were told that President Trump expected Syria to join the coalition to defeat ISIS, according to a senior administration official, and previously has pushed al-Sharaa to join the Abraham Accords to normalize relations between Syria and Israel. Meanwhile, while al-Sharaa is pressed with unifying his country at home, abroad he is pushing for the further lifting of sanctions in what the country's foreign minister has called a new chapter in U.S.-Syrian relations. Now, the U.S. has lifted some sanctions against Syria ahead of this, as well as seen state and treasury remove al-Sharaa from their designated list, and the U.S. lead a UN Security Council resolution to delist him. Now, Syria's foreign minister indicated in recent remarks that Syria wants, additionally, those further lifting of sanctions, some which require congressional action, as well as support in defeating ISIS. Now, keep in mind here, what makes this visit so notable is al-Shara was previously an insurgent leader tied to al-Qaeda and rebel forces fighting against the U.S. and Iraq before he then led HTS, what was a designated foreign terrorist organization that toppled the Assad regime in Syria, leading up to where we are today. Him meeting at the White House after having met over the past several months with top administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, President Trump in Saudi Arabia last spring, and just this week playing basketball with the head of Central Command. Andrew?
And Haley, the big story in Washington, aside from this visit, is, of course, any developments on the shutdown. When it comes to the White House, we saw some new actions today relating to those SNAP benefits. What's the latest there?
Yeah, the administration notifying the Supreme Court that it will continue its efforts to block lower court orders that require it to fully fund the SNAP program. And it is the latest in the legal back and forth over the food benefits program. We have seen that impacts millions of Americans who rely on the benefit to put food on their kitchen tables. Now, the administration initially said it would comply with court orders to tap into contingency funds to at least partially fund those benefits for November, eventually getting to the number of about 65% of a recipient's max allotment. However, the courts then came back and said they had to fully fund the program, the administration challenging that. While the government's filing today noted, though, particularly, Andrew, the movement we have seen over the past 24 hours to end the government shutdown, saying if that were to be complete, it would moot their application in this regard. Another issue simultaneously playing out as over the weekend, the government sent directions to states telling them to undo steps processing full SNAP benefits after telling the states it was looking at how to do those. The government saying in that latest direction to states that it was unauthorized and threatening penalties if a state did not. The government pointing to that in their filing as well. Bottom line, millions of Americans still looking at where their benefits next come from.
Yeah, potentially some big developments for those who are dependent on SNAP to figure out their next meal. Scripps News White House correspondent Haley Bull for us. Haley, thank you.
Up next on Today As It Happened.
I'm John Matarese. Leasing a car is so convenient and often has lower payments than buying that car. But one man just learned the big downside when he found out he could no longer drive, but still had that lease.
And later,
Democrats demanded that we find a way to fix this crisis and quickly, but Republicans have refused to move an inch. So I cannot support the Republican bill that's on the floor.
In a West Virginia court will hear arguments today in a lawsuit challenging the state's deployment of National Guard troops to patrol Washington, D.C. streets. The West Virginia Citizen Action Group says Governor Patrick Morrisey exceeded his authority by sending up to 300 Guard members to the nation's capital as part of President Trump's crime-fighting efforts in Democrat-run cities. The state argues that the deployment was authorized under federal law. More than 2,300 Guards troops from 8 states are now patrolling D.C. under the Army Secretary's command. Formal orders were issued late last week to extend the Guards' stay in the nation's capital until the end of February. And France's former president Nicolas Sarkozy left a Paris prison on Monday after an appeals court granted him release under judicial supervision. Sarkozy had been given a 5-year sentence for criminal conspiracy in a scheme to finance his 2007 election campaign with funds from Libya. The 70-year-old is banned from leaving French territory and from contacting co-defendants and witnesses. Sarkozy became the first former French head of state in modern times to be sent behind bars.
If you purchase a car and you no longer need it, well, you always have the option to sell it. But ending a lease early can be very costly, even if you can no longer drive.
Tim Meek struggles to get in his SUV. Even buckling up is tough. You see, this local guitarist was recently diagnosed with ALS.
Started with the right arm, was incredibly weak, and my fingers didn't work like they were supposed to.
While he had to quit playing music, he can't quit his car lease.
There's nothing in that contract that says you can get out of this lease.
No.
The lender told him he's obligated to pay even if he can't drive.
I'm actually dying.
The few exceptions for breaking a lease are typically reserved for military members and sometimes people forced to move for work. Experts say the termination fee alone can cost as much as the remaining payments on your lease.
Usually, if you do need to get out of the lease, you're going to lose money. It gets expensive.
One option is talking with your dealer about renegotiating the terms of your contract, according to NerdWallet's Kimberly Palmer.
In some cases, they can offer you a less expensive vehicle to lease.
David Underkoffler of Car Gurus also recommends a lease transfer or swap.
A lease swap gives somebody else the opportunity to get into your lease at usually the same terms.
Lease transfer companies include Swap-A-Lease and Lease Trader. Transferring a lease isn't free, but once someone else takes over, you can walk away.
You do want to make sure you're using a legitimate company, a legitimate website to help facilitate that lease.
We contacted Tim Meek's lender, which is now reviewing his case, but currently for now, he has to continue making payments.
It's very disheartening.
On a car he may soon no longer be able to drive. As always, don't waste your money. John Mattery, Scripps News Group.
You're watching Today As It Happened. Back in a moment. Glad you're back with Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer, here with your daily rundown of the day's top stories.
It's after 40 days of wandering in the wilderness and making the American people suffer needlessly, some Senate Democrats finally have stepped forward to end the pain. It appears to us this morning that our long national nightmare is finally coming to an end, and we're grateful for that.
It doesn't change the core problem here, which is we need to decisively address the Republican health care crisis on behalf of working class Americans, everyday Americans, and middle class Americans.
I'm grateful that the end is in sight. But I would encourage every member of this body, Democrat or Republican, pro-bill or anti-bill, not to stand in the way of our being able to deliver the coming relief quickly. The American people have suffered for long enough.
Democrats demanded that we find a way to fix this crisis and quickly. But Republicans have refused to move an inch. So I cannot support the Republican bill that's on the floor.
The federal government shutdown is finally a step closer to ending.
On this vote, the yeas are 60 and the nays are 40.
7 Senate Democrats and 1 independent who caucuses with Democrats joining Republicans to advance legislation that would fund the government through the end of January, provide back pay to federal workers, and reverse shutdown-related layoffs. It would also fully fund SNAP benefits through September 2026.
I'm a little, cautiously optimistic because it's been changing so much.
That would be welcome news for Annie Newton, one of the 42 million Americans who rely on those benefits to put food on the table. She told Scripps News Group Denver last week how the pause in benefits has impacted her.
Gone 3 days without eating, and that's the first time. It's not usual for me.
On Monday, the Trump administration urging the Supreme Court again to keep SNAP payments frozen until the government reopens. Noticeably absent from the Senate's proposal, any guarantee to fund expiring Affordable Care Act subsidies, long the focus of Democrats' shutdown fight. The proposal would only guarantee a Senate vote on that issue by mid-December. Not good enough for many Democrats.
And they're going to have to explain themselves to their constituents and to the American people.
There's no relief in that bill for the incredible pressures people are feeling.
But the agreement is not yet a done deal. The House still has to pass the government funding deal too. Speaker Johnson urging members to get back to D.C. for the first time in over 50 days ahead of that upcoming vote.
To all my colleagues, Republicans and Democrats in the House, you need to begin right now returning to the Hill. We have to do this as quickly as possible.
Nathaniel Reed, Scripps News Group, Capitol Hill.
And now let's take a look at some of our other top headlines of the day.
The U.S. military killed 6 more people in strikes on alleged drug-running boats in the Pacific. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said today The Sunday strikes bring the total death toll to 76 people since the campaign began in September. Hegseth says the votes were operated by designated terrorist organizations, I should say. The UN rights chief is calling for investigations into what he calls possible extrajudicial killings. At least 8 people are dead after a car exploded in New Delhi earlier today. Several others were injured. It happened near a metro station gate at a major tourist attraction known as Red Fort, which used to be an imperial palace. Investigators are still working to figure out what caused the blast. And at least 8 people are also feared dead after a powerful typhoon hit the northern Philippines. The storm has also forced nearly 1.5 million people from their homes. It also triggered deadly landslides and floods. More than 300,000 people are in evacuation centers as the storm heads toward Taiwan. Confirmation now that young people are priced out of the housing market. First-time home buyers hit a historic low, making up just 21% of all purchases. The typical first-time buyer is now 40 years old. That's according to the National Association of Realtors. The share of first-time buyers has dropped by 50% since 2007. Delayed home ownership until age 40 instead of 30 can mean losing roughly $150,000 in equity. And happy 250th anniversary to the U.S. Marine Corps. Each state is celebrating this landmark day their own way, including music, drills, and reunions among veterans. The U.S. Mint also unveiling today a special commemorative silver to honor the Marines.
Coming up on Today as It Happened.
The charges are very severe. If both players are convicted, they could face anywhere to up to 65 years in prison.
I think based on everything I'm hearing, they haven't changed anything, and we have support from enough Democrats, and we're going to be opening up our country. It's too bad it was closed, but we'll be opening up our country very quickly. I'll abide by the deal. The deal is very good.
You're watching Today as It Happened, Scripps News rundown of the biggest events and stories of the day. So let's jump right in.
Well, 2 pitchers with the Cleveland Guardians are being investigated for taking bribes from bettors, giving them advance notice of the pitches they would throw and intentionally lobbing balls instead of strikes for thousands of dollars. Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz have both been indicted. The gamblers involved were unnamed, but from the players' home country of the Dominican Republic. They won almost $500,000 on in-game prop bets on the speed and outcome of pitches. Lawyers for both players say their clients are innocent. The MLB and the Guardians say they are cooperating with law enforcement. Joining us now is Matt Rybaltowski. He's a writer with IGB and contributor with Forbes Sports Money. Matt, thanks for joining us. Walk us through exactly what these players are accused of doing and how they did it.
Yeah, you articulated it really well before, Andrew. Both of these pitchers were charged with a litany of felonies, anywhere from wire fraud conspiracy to commit money laundering to honest services fraud. And the charges are very severe. If both players are convicted, they could face anywhere to up to 65 years in prison. So usually in federal cases, they won't receive a sentence that long, but again, it just underscores the seriousness of these charges.
And it seems like these stories are coming out more and more frequently. It's not just one sport. We're seeing it across the board in both professional and college. Do you think this is becoming more common because of law enforcement focusing in on it more? Is it just becoming more frequent in the sports themselves, or some sort of a combo of both?
Yeah, it's a combination of all those factors. A large amount of the credit goes to the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn, which has historically been known as the region that's sort of they act as the mob busters, or they've convicted a number of organized crime figures, uh, kingpins from mafia families in the past, and they've spent multiple years on this investigation. And typically, what happens is when one major figure is under investigation, he may provide substantial assistance to the government, or even flip. And so I was on your program 2 weeks ago when the NBA scandal broke. And so if you look at it, it's really not a surprise that it's extending to other sports, because there might be commonalities here between all the investigations. And if you look at it even deeper, there's been 4 sports that have been under investigation for major betting scandals over the last month. So I would say that this is not the end. This is the tip of the iceberg, and we may even see even more indictments over the next few weeks.
And you wrote about the problems that micro betting, I think is what you called it, poses. We've been talking about prop betting, this idea that I can bet on a specific pitch at the top of an inning being a ball or a strike. And that is easy to see, and we're seeing it play out in the story that we're talking about, how that can be manipulated by bad actors. Whereas if you try to bet that the Cleveland Guardians are going to win by 2.5 runs over 9 innings, well, that becomes a lot more complicated. Is there any sort of momentum on that front in either limiting or eliminating altogether some of these most specific bets that we have seen really be the focus of some of these bad actors?
There's a good deal of momentum. It became clear over the summer, right before the All-Star break, that these 2 pitchers were under investigation. And in Ohio, Governor Mike DeWine, he called on state regulators to look into banning these micro bets entirely. And Governor DeWine has also urged 7 commissioners from various sports to consider restricting some of these player-focused props. So, as you mentioned before, in many of these cases, guys like Emmanuel Clase, he was the best reliever in Major League Baseball in 2024, and there were indications that it was during the period of when he may have been conspiring to fix games. So it's one of those cases where both things can be true, where you have someone who's fixing one pitch, but then he's also striking out batters at a large rate and delivering a really strong ERA. So it almost speaks to the fact that these bets need to be taken offline right away, just to restore the integrity of the game.
Yeah, and that kind of leads to my next question is that have the betting sites themselves indicated any willingness to help? It seems like if there are like tens of thousands of dollars being bet on a random pitch in a Major League Baseball game at the top of the 3rd inning, that should trigger some sort of alert. Is that the case?
That is the case, yeah. And so there's been reports that the betting sites have been amenable to holding those discussions. Now, it hasn't reached the stage where the betting sites have banned those bets outright yet, but it could be in those stages, and it could be the type of thing where those bets are banned before the season starts next year. Because right now we don't know which sites the bets occurred at. They're just referred to in the indictment as betting site 1 or betting site 2. But to your point, the the technology out there, the surveillance technology is very high tech. And so if you have these markets where a normal ball or strike might have $2,000 or $3,000 wagered on average, and then all of a sudden you see a bet come in for $38,000 or $58,000, and it sets off these red flags that there's suspicious activity there. So it looks like the momentum is there to restrict those bets. It just hasn't reached that stage yet.
All right, Matt Rybeltowski with IGB. Matt, thank you so much for your insights.
Up next on Today As It Happened.
We are causing real damage to our ability to live in comfort on this planet right now. And we're doing it by emitting carbon into the atmosphere.
So how can we get together and say, look, no matter what you believe is driving this, how do Democrats and Republicans work together to address these disasters to protect all Americans?
Well, we have to first recognize what the source of the disasters are, and that's emitting carbon into the atmosphere. And then we have to figure out how we can do less of it. One of the things that's really challenging and troubling to me is we're seeing from the Trump administration right now a desire to burn fossil fuels almost for the sake of burning fossil fuels. They're promoting the burning of fossil fuels that are not only dirty, not only exacerbate the climate crisis, but also are expensive and unreliable. There's one facility in Western Michigan called the Campbell Coal Plant that the Trump administration has demanded stay open at a massive cost to ratepayers. The utility that operates that plant has said that so far, just since May, it's cost them $80 million in order to keep this facility open. That's a bad deal, and that's a cost that is going to have to be borne by ratepayers, unfortunately, spread across the states that are served by that area. It just doesn't make any sense.
So in light of what you're saying, the rising cost of energy, it is affecting all Americans. How can we lower these costs for families and protect our communities so we don't have situations like in Michigan?
Well, the first thing that we can do is stop trying to snuff out clean energy. There's a massive solar facility out in the desert in Nevada called Esmeralda 7. That was permitted by effectively lumping together 7 different energy projects into one permitting structure so that they could move it forward faster. What we've just recently seen from the Trump administration is an effort to throw sand in the gears and halt the permitting process for that project. We've also seen a real assault on offshore wind from the Trump administration. These are really valuable sources of energy for us. Our friends at American Clean Power did a study, and they learned that 93% of new energy to come onto the grid last year in 2024 came from either wind, solar, or storage. clean energy is energy. Working to try to get rid of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for anyone. And as I'm seeing on the screen right now, comes at a devastating cost in terms of accelerating once in a generation and once in a lifetime storms, which have become all too common. We've also seen the Trump administration say, well, we're going to stop counting billion-dollar storms. Stopping counting activity is not the same as stopping it from happening.
So when this clean energy, I mean, obviously it is what the future is, especially around the world. What is it here that is stopping us in our country? I mean, as we know that wind is working and solar is working, what seems to be the disconnect to you?
There was no disconnect until President Trump came back into office and seems to have his thumb on the scale to attempt to promote dirty energy just for its own sake and to try to punish and snuff out clean energy. That's a bad deal for consumers. It's a bad deal for ratepayers. It's one of the reasons why his approval rating in terms of handling prices and inflation are absolutely underwater. He's got a net negative 33 rating on bringing down prices, which is the thing that he was elected in order to do. He's not doing a very good job of it.
See, the UN Climate Change Conference is happening this week in Brazil, and the U.S., who's the #2 polluter in the world, will not be represented as the Trump administration not sending anyone this year. Does this concern you? And what might be some of the repercussions if we are not represented there?
Of course it concerns me. The United States, whether you like it or not, has a position of power and leadership within the world. We could either use that position for good, or we can use it to beat on a bully pulpit and try to declare that the climate crisis is a giant hoax, which is exactly, I think those are the words that we've heard from President Trump. He's called it a Green New Scam. That's a tough pill to swallow if you are in harm's way.
So President Trump also pulling the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Treaty again, as he did in his first term. But many in our country look at that and say, so what? How is this going to affect Americans in the long run, if at all? So explain why it's important to be a part of this, along with the rest of the world.
Well, I think recognizing that we have a problem is often the first step towards actually diagnosing it and working to solve it. And this president and this administration have insisted that we don't, in fact, have a problem, that we have a quote-unquote Green New Scam, and seem to be cheerleading in a way that I've not seen for some of the dirtiest forms of energy, including building coal and keeping coal plants that were slated to retire open long past their planned retirement date. Coal is not only the dirtiest form of energy we could possibly get, it's also the most expensive and among the least reliable.
David Kiva, president of EDF Action, thank you so much for your time and your insight today. We appreciate you being here. Thank you for joining us on Today As It Happened. I'm Holly Furfer. We hope you have a great Monday night.